It's been about 6 months since the substrate was changed in Refugium last, and so at this point I need to empty all the water out of it, replace the substrate, clean it, and then fill it back up with water. And so this video is going to be a quick breakdown of the steps involved in replacing your substrate and cleaning your Refugium. Unfortunately, my tank setup and the location of it and the size of the Refugium, it's not possible for me to take the Refugium out of the stand. It can only be taken out from behind, and so I have to do all the maintenance to it while keeping the Refugium in place. And so makes it a little bit trickier, but at least with this setup, that's what I have to deal with. So I didn't follow my own advice, actually. If you remember from, if you've seen the other video on how to set up the aquarium, I talked about the importance of putting valves on both the outflow and the inflow tracks to the aquarium. And I have a valve on the movement of water back from the Refugium into the aquarium, but I don't have a valve on this side where gravity is pulling the water down into the Refugium. And so instead of being able to shut the water off with the valve, which would be really easy, the next best thing to do is just use some saran wrap and place it over top of your outflow tract from the aquarium. And I would leave your pump on and try to pump out as much water from it as possible. But we'll try this here and see. I'm going to turn off the fluval filter, canister filter I have that's pushing water in on that side right now, so this way the saran wrap will stay. But basically you just kind of pull it around here. You can rubber band it, and that'll stop the outflow or stop the flow of water into the Refugium. So I'll put a rubber band on there, and then we'll continue the process. So now that we have the water flow into the Refugium stopped, I'm going to take the sock out, and then we're going to take the biological media that I have. The biological media is sitting in this side, and I'll put it into a cup just to save. Make sure you don't rinse your biological media in water with chlorine in it, because you'll end up killing some of the good bacteria you have already in there. But scoop this out. Once we get this scooped out, then I'll start removing the plants and the sponge and the air stones, and we'll get this thing pretty empty. So I've emptied out all the biological media, and now we're just going to scoop out the plants before we empty out the rest of the water. These plants, have used up all the nutrients in the mud that I have in the bottom here, and I'm not going to save them. We're going to change over from using wisteria, and this next 6 months I'm going to use Java instead. So I've ordered some plants from that aquariumplants.com, and they got here today, and I already have the replacement Miracle Mud. So we're going to change things out and try something different this time. So after you get your plants out, you can take your sponge out, because at this point, hopefully we filtered out all that water. It shouldn't be pouring it in. I have a little bit more from of the biological media on the other side, and I'll rinse the sponge out. There's plenty of good bacteria left in the biological media. That should be fine. So we'll take the rest of the biological media out from that side, and I'll show you guys how I'm going to have to, unfortunately, because I said I can't pull this thing out, I'm going to have to drain the water basically by hand with a cup. There's not much water in there, but still it's a little bit of a pain. But I'll show that to you here in a second. So at this point, I've pulled out my pump, and obviously I'm using the valve to keep water from backflowing into the Refugium. And so now, unfortunately, like I was saying, because of the fact that this Refugium can't be pulled out, I have to empty the water by hand, which obviously takes some time. But there's not a whole lot of water in there, and usually you're able to pull it out relatively quickly. with the only exception being that rear compartment where the water enters from the tank. There's not really a very good way to get back in there, but we'll show you a few times here. Obviously pretty self-explanatory, but just pull the water out of the refugium, dump it in the bucket here, and once you get it down to that level where you're essentially at your substrate, then you can use your cup here to scoop the substrate out, and then I'll show you, once we get to that point, I'll show you, how we get the rest of it clean and go from there. So at this point I've pulled out all the water I can with the cups, and I use those cups to scoop out what the amount of substrate I could buy, the most I could probably get easily by hand. And so for the last part, I'm going to use a shop vac to suck out the remaining layer of water and dirt and debris that is built up in the bottom part of the aquarium. So if you use the shop vac, make sure you take off the filter on the inside of it before you use it. There's a paper filter. If you take off the lid, it just unscrews, and that way you won't ruin it. So I'll mute the sound for this part so you guys don't have to listen to it, but I'll show you the shop vac cleaning out the bottom here. But anyways, you can see it makes quick work of it, and it's pretty slick. At this point now, essentially the refugium is empty. All the gravel for the most part's gone, the water's out. I just need to wipe it down with a towel and clean out some of this grime and algae that had built up over time. And then we can put the new substrate in and start the process of filling it with water and then the plants, and then we're about done. So getting closer. Again, we're not trying to be perfect, we're just trying to get as much of this grime out of it as we can. I'll save you guys from this part and show you when we're starting to add the substrate back into the refugium here in just a few minutes. So we finished up wiping down the aquarium, or at least the refugium I should say, and now we're going to add that miracle mud into the second chamber. And in my size refugium, 10 pounds works pretty well, and so that's what that bag is in there. So we just simply empty the bag into the aquarium, or into the refugium, excuse me again, and then we'll level it out and get it to about the right height. If you need to, you can remove some of it if there's too much in there. But this is what I'm using here is Miracle Mud 2, which works really well for freshwater aquariums, discus aquariums, that type of stuff. So we'll level it out. And that looks about right. You want plenty of substrate for the plants to grow roots into. You don't need to add any fertilizer tabs or anything like that. That's the advantage of Miracle Mud. There's plenty for the growth of the plants. And now we need to add some water into this aquarium, or into the refugium. So we'll do that next. So to put water back into your refugium, you want to try to do it in a way that's not going to disturb the substrate, because you don't want to have to wait hours and hours after you change this in order to get the to start your pump up again. And so you put a plate down on top of substrate, and then I'm going to use some gravity to help me, and basically we're going to run from, I have a bucket with my water sitting on a chair beside the Refugium, and then I'm just going to use a siphon and siphon the water from the bucket into the Refugium. And it runs a little slow because there's not a lot of gravity difference here, but slower is better. If you can avoid to have it run too quick, then you can help to avoid having some of this stir up. But you'll see here that even running slow, there's still going to be some debris on top of the water that will kind of work itself out as the aquarium settles. If you when you go to change your water in your Refugium and you make a big change like this, it's definitely beneficial to have a second filter on the aquarium. And so, if you're from my first video, we talked about a little bit the advantages of having a canister filter on here as well. Since it provides extra filtration to the aquarium, especially if you're somebody who's out of town quite a bit, you want plenty of filtration here. And in situations like this, where you go to change your plants in your Refugium and clean it all out completely, it helps to have a stable filter that's running on your aquarium as well, kind of limit some of the changes. After this is all done and you go to start running the pump again, I would strongly encourage you to watch your nitrite, nitrate, and ammonia levels for the next week or two, as this aquarium is starting to, as your Refugium is starting to cycle again. And so, like I said, I have those biological media that I'm going to keep that I haven't touched really, and so that'll help the process. But it's never a bad idea to watch your levels of nitrate and nitrite and ammonia closely when you're making a big change to an aquarium. So at this point, the Refugium is kind of looking back to normal again. We have, I went ahead and, when you guys go to clean your Refugium, make sure you take that time to clean the pump really well and get out any debris that's in there or any buildup around it. But I put the pump back together and have it back in the tank. I put the sponge back in, and the biological media is all in place, the sock's back in, and I finished filling it up in the same way I was doing before. And so we're ready to add plants, and so I'm adding Java this time. I used Wisteria last time. You want something that's a fast-growing plant that will work well for your Refugium. And so basically you're just going to place these in the soil in the Refugium, in your substrate there. Try to do it in a way to minimize the kick-up of the sand. You're going to get some no matter what you do. And spread them out a little bit too. They're going to start growing relatively quickly, and you don't want them on top of each other. Once you get these guys in place, then depending on how much the substrate's kicked up, you can let it calm down first, or you can go ahead and turn your filter on, your pump on again, and open the valve back up and all that, and get things back and running. Like I was saying, just keep a close eye on your levels. And there we go. So that's about it. Takes a little bit of time to do, especially if you have a setup like mine where you're not able to remove the Refugium from the back and clean it out in a more conducive position, but it still isn't too bad to do just with it underneath the aquarium the whole time. But that's it. We're going to get things started back up, and I'll show it to you one more time after we get things up and running. So the Refugium's been up and running now for about an hour, and the water is all cleared out inside of it. The plants look good, and I think everything is kind of back into place as it was before the cleaning of the Refugium. And I do this every 6 months. Sometimes you can stretch it and do it longer. Some people will only change half of the substrate in their refugium at a time, but I find that it's easier just to change it all out, because it just makes such a mess when you try to scoop out half of the refugium with a bunch of water still inside of it. And so I think it's easier just to break it down and do it all at once and get it all taken care of. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and post them in the comments below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. It's a little bit of a shorter video, so hopefully there's enough information there to make it worthwhile if you're going to be changing out and cleaning your refugium for the first time. Thanks.